Welcome back to the Ravencrest Books brand new podcast. We actually have thought of a name for it now, so I can actually introduce it as The Right Space, the podcast for writers and for authors, specifically in the wellness area. So today I'm excited to introduce Rachel Ann Cullen, who's joining us to talk about her incredible journey through her mental health struggles to becoming a 3 times and nearly 4 times published author. So thank you so much for joining us. Obviously we had a chat last week and it was amazing to chat and talk all about your journey and your writing and your publishing, so I'm excited to talk to you today in more detail. I would love if you could firstly just tell us a bit about your background in your health journey and which led you to writing your first book.
Yeah, sure. Well, hi, Becky. Thank you for that lovely introduction, and I love the name of your podcast first of all. So I'll just drop that one in. So you've asked me kind of a huge question to start off with, because I guess my mental and my wellness journey has been kind of over a number of decades, which kind of explains why I have written about that in a series of books and not just in like a little skinny pamphlet, because the fact that it's taken me a few books to kind of get the evolution of that journey and to communicate that, and the fact that there isn't kind of a finish line for that. So when you write a book or you share a part of your story in the health and wellness space, I think it's really important to remember that that person's journey hasn't finished. When somebody picks up your book, you're still on that journey. So I think to kind of my initial response to your question is I'd love to sort of talk you through the 4 decades of ups and downs and where it started and the mental health and the physical journey and the running and all of that stuff. But to be honest, it would just take up this entire podcast, and I think it's probably just worth just mentioning, particularly because of your interest in the health and wellness space, that anybody's journey, if they share that in the pages of a book, that's a tiny fraction of their bigger journey. And I just think it's important to remember that when you read that person's book in the non-fiction genre, that person has shared with the world something that's very personal to them, that's very, they've lived that journey. They haven't just written it, they've lived it in order to be able to write it. So my journey begins with my mum's mental illness. She suffered with very severe, they called it manic depression back in the day, but that kind of impacted on my childhood. And I was only aware in later years, when I began to exhibit the same patterns were forming in my life, that really impacted on every aspect. And then fast forward the physical journey, I'm really kind of chopping this down into kind of I'm really kind of trying to make this as succinct as possible. But I began to align the physical need for movement, and running was my thing that got me kind of on a different track. And I began to align that with my mental health and mental well-being. And just to summarise again, the discovery of running after my daughter was born in 2011, and running the first marathon that I ran when she was 7 months old, that was kind of a real catalyst for me to feel empowered and take control of my mental and my physical well-being, and to do that. Thank you for saying that. It feels like I was completely unaware of any labels of this. It was just a thing I felt like I needed to do. It was like a compulsion. I knew I needed something to cement, just to put me firmly in the place where I felt able to be a mum who could cope with being responsible for not only my own well-being but another little life, and to kind of set the trajectory for showing my daughter ultimately what a strong and capable and a mum who was in control of her own direction, what that looked like, and I was really clear at that time that's what I wanted to do, and that's kind of where the journey, the real journey began. I mean, obviously there's a backstory there in terms of trying out running, and my 20s were spent on mental health meds and drinking alcohol and being a lawyer, and that was a very different, it was a very unhealthy lifestyle for me. But then came sort of this kind of massive life-changing experience, being a mum, coming off the mental health meds and deciding to just take another path. And that's the journey that I've spent the last 8 years kind of writing about, and how that's rolled out, sort of, you know, from that point on.
Yeah, I mean, just from that brief kind of introduction there, you can see why you've already got 3 books published about your kind of life and your struggles and your journey, and there's another one out just about to come out, and I'm guessing there's probably going to be some more as well.
I don't know, because I think, you know, nobody would commit to writing a book that they weren't completely 100%. This is a story I have to tell, because that just doesn't make any sense. It's too hard.
Yeah.
So I don't have, you know, I'm not going to. I've spent the last 8 years. I mean, I started writing my first book in 2015, the day before my 5th London Marathon. Because I wanted to communicate the real story of, you know, what running had been and hadn't been in my life, and how fitness was not a thing that had come naturally and easily to me. And there was a huge mental health story behind my journey, but I had no idea at that point that there'd be any more stories that I wanted to tell or felt the need to tell, or even you know, that was nowhere on the horizon.
Yeah.
Because again, at that point, I was only on that tiny part of the journey. I had no idea what lay ahead. How can anybody know in 2015, you know, that a mental illness, body dysmorphia, is going to come raging back 2 years down the line, and you're going to have to work your way through that, and running's not going to be the answer. Nobody's going to know that. So I think I've just kind of, that was the book I felt compelled to write, and the story I felt compelled to share. And I think from there was no concept of other books at that time. They were only ever born out of a need to, I guess, share my experiences and communicate with other people who may have experienced the same. That's where this comes from. So I think as we sit here now, I don't know if there'll be any other books. I know that my journey will continue, because that's all of us are on a journey, but I don't know if I'll have the inclination to, if there'll be anything that pulls me into sharing another part of a story. I just don't know at this stage, but I think 4's pretty good going.
I think it's pretty good going, yeah. I mean, like I said, you've been through so much, and like, it's huge and it's incredible that you've been able to share those things, and it's really brave and it's really vulnerable to go to be able to share those things with people, with the kind of idea that you're going to make a difference to those people. Can you remember what exactly it was that made you think, I need to write a book about this? Can you remember that day?
Yeah, I can remember the day vividly, and like I say, I was in the bath. It was in a hotel in London before I was due to run the London Marathon 2015, and I just remember I had like the iPad at the time, and it was this kind of overriding feeling of other people. I cannot be the only person who feels misunderstood. I can't be the only person whose kind of running journey or their fitness journey or their wellness journey has been and is being misunderstood, and isn't somehow, the narrative isn't what people may think it is. So I think it was a need to reach out to other people whose backstory may have been similar to my own, who may have had a parent who struggled with mental illness, who may have been through bouts and episodes of that themselves, who may have found running, which for me at that time it was the thing that really kind of enabled me to take some control over that. And it was about so much more than running a marathon. It was about overcoming other barriers. It wasn't about oh, what time are you going to get? What time are you going for? And my running had developed, you know, and had evolved, and that was great. But it was just about it was a bigger story than that. And in actual fact, I do honestly believe that my first book, Running for My Life, which is the one that a big publisher got hold of, it's actually not real. It isn't just about running. That, I think that's the appeal of it. It's about the other universal things that we all kind of have, that kind of we share those experiences. And from my experience, having shared my story, that part of my story in 2018 when it came out, the number of people who got in contact and kind of said that aspects of my journey had resonated with theirs. And I think ultimately, I'm quite sure that's probably why I wrote it, because I just refused to believe that I was the only person that felt like there was this one-dimensional view of what running was and how it had been, how it was a part of my life, and it was just so much bigger than that. And my journey was so much bigger than this tiny snapshot of this person who was like, you know, supposed to find it easy because I'd done it a few times before and all of that stuff. And I was supposed to find it easy because I looked like a runner. And, you know, there was just such a lot of nonsense that I thought, no, you know, if people fully understood that the journey right from childhood to this point right now, it's just about so much more than running from point A to point B. It's just symbolic of a life journey rather than just a measured distance around the streets of London. So I think that's the reason for me doing that.
You mentioned it was obviously you had responses from people who you'd obviously reached with your book. That must have been quite a big responsibility. But I mean, was it also a bit of a therapy for you in the way that it made those other people, your readers, feel less alone? Was that also the kind of the same thing for you as well? Did it make you feel less alone writing
Yeah,
it?
I think it was.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely it did. And it kind of, yeah, and you do, when you open yourself up in this way and when you share a part of your experience, your lived experience, and and it resonates with people and they read your words and feel the need to make contact or to reach out or to send a message and just say, look, you know, this was my experience and it wasn't exactly the same as yours, but actually there are threads that really resonate, and this is the part that connects us. You immediately have a connection with that person, and you've never met that person, but something about your lived experience kind of immediately binds you in a way. And I think it's kind of it does make both people feel like their experience is not one that they've just lived you know, alone. It is something that other people can relate to. Whereas when you are in that place, when you are in a mental health crisis, when you are in a place where you are lost and you don't know the way forward, when you doubt that, you know, things can be better, or things don't have to be as they are, or you don't have to be as you are, I think it's easy to believe that you are alone in that experience.
Yeah.
And it's easy to believe that you are the only person who is, you know, for example, as I felt at times, living in a career that was toxic, living a lifestyle that was toxic, mentally fragile, emotionally volatile, really, not making good decisions about mixing mental health meds with alcohol. I mean, everything felt like it was off the scale, you know, just completely running like a runaway train. But when you realise that when you share your story, other people have also felt like that, and there may be some people who at the time are in that place, and for them it's kind of a signpost that there is a way out, and it is possible to find your thing, and it is possible to get on a recovery journey, because like I say, it's not an end destination, it's an onward continuing journey, but you can find the path to that place. And if running's the way that you get there, if Morris dancing's the way you get there, if going down the gym and doing weights is the way you get there, if whatever the route, there is a way from that place to a better place. So I think it's that is the powerful thing, not only for the person who reads the story, but for somebody like me who then hears about another person's experience, because it's a very special thing when somebody shares a part of their experience with you. They don't know me.
Yeah.
They don't know who I am, but in a sense, when you share your story, part of your experience in the page of the book, they kind of do at the same time, because you've put your heart and soul out there. So in a sense, they may not know me, but actually, I guess in some ways that doesn't make sense, because they kind of do. They get a sense of who this person is. They get a sense of your of who you are. That's what writing non-fiction books in this genre is. It's sharing a part of yourself with whoever, with and it's kind of doing that, opening that. Yeah,
I think that's the kind of the powerful thing about writing within this genre specifically, is that you kind of have that power to show to inspire your readers and to motivate your readers, for them to resonate with whatever you're writing about, and for them to feel touched about what you're writing about, and have that kind of impact on their life, where they then read your book and then go, hang on, she's gone through the same thing as me, and she's done this, this and this, and she's on a path, and she's going onwards and upwards, not necessarily saying she's overcome it, but she's brought herself out of that hole, put herself on that path, and she's done something about it.
Yeah.
All it takes is that little bit of motivation to see that somebody else has been in that position, and then it's possible to move out of it. That's huge for readers.
Yeah, and I think it's really powerful in terms of sharing stories, and I think we get so much strength from reading about, from hearing about other people's lived experience. I'm a non-fiction junkie. I love reading about what other people have done, the adventures they've had, the things they've overcome. It's just like there's something that's so powerful about a person opening themselves up and actually sharing a part of that with other people. And I think that's kind of one of the reasons why, after I'd written the first two books, which were very sort of my story centric, I'd kind of got to the point where I was being sort of strengthened by so many other people's stories, that I felt compelled to write their stories in a book and to share their experiences. So we kind of came full circle. And it kind of weirdly did this thing where I'd put my story out there, and then a couple of years later I was going through a phase in my life where my physical health was questionable. I was having back trouble. There were all sorts of things physically going on for me, and it kind of, I was getting support from hearing other people's stories, just as I'd done a few years beforehand. And that's where the third book came from, which was about, again, me kind of trying to demonstrate the threads that connect us and bind us, and how it works in this sort of cyclical fashion. And it's not that one person doesn't benefit in this, everybody benefits, because you're no longer alone on that journey, and you're no longer kind of fooled by your mind into thinking that this is some kind of solitary, very, very deep hole that you're in, and you realise there are other people there who are sort of willing you on in a way, and in their various the ways that things have transpired in their lives, they've kind of taken hold of that, taken control of it, and done something with it. So I think it's kind of come full circle for me. But over a period of 8 years, I guess that's not that's not really a big surprise, because you'd imagine it seems only fair to sort of write about other people's stories and how they're impacted on.
I think that's a really nice idea to have, and especially with the names, how the names of your books intertwine with each other as well. It literally is like that's where it started, and you've gone on the journey, and
Yeah,
now you're including like
yeah.
the kind of community within your stories as well. I really want to ask you about your publishing process, but I'm really like drawn in, and I'm really itching to ask, how did you go from kind of wanting to write about what's been going on in your life, actually putting it in a book? And what I mean is, there's there's a certain way that you need to write and a certain style that you need to write it in this kind of genre, to make it readable and to make it relatable. Because you can't just write, oh, well, one day I had a bad day and I was having these feelings and it was all better.
Yeah.
Like, how did
Yeah.
you create a
Yeah.
book's worth of those kind of feelings
Yeah.
and the pathway? How did you go about that?
Yeah. I think the first thing to mention on that is this kind of, I had always written, so it wasn't a thing that kind of writing was just some tool that I plucked out of thin air, that I thought
Okay.
I'm going to write a book, I'm going to, as opposed to I'm going to make a film about, it's like writing was always my go-to
Right.
um, place, always, through my teenage years, through all years actually. I'd always write, and writing was a thing that came naturally to me, and um, I was very confident in my own voice, because how on earth you can't write in anybody else's voice.
Mm.
If you're in non-fiction, you're writing in your own voice, and you have to have the confidence that your writing voice is fully you and it's yours. So, I've never ever been somebody who was tempted to try and change that in any way, because it's just after, I'm 45 now, so after like 40 years of writing diaries, of writing journals, of writing for as part of my um education, career, it's been such a fundamental part of my life for 4 decades. And I think after that amount of time, when writing was my go-to place,
Yeah.
before any social media existed, through my teenage years, I pour all my my teenage woes out onto the page. So I always did that, and I always had this kind of, I knew what my writing voice was, and I was never kind of, I never wavered on that, and I never doubted or questioned how I was writing, because I think
Mm.
you can overthink things too. So it was literally my voice. So what you read in the pages of the books, it's literally just my voice. There's no, so I don't know if that helps or answers your question, but it's
Yeah.
simply, you either know who you are when you're writing, and that's what comes out, and that's the voice that people read, and they can hear you read, they can hear you saying it,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that's how you would communicate, and they can hear you doing that.
Yeah.
Or you try to find it from somewhere and it doesn't work, because it doesn't feel authentic and it doesn't feel like your voice. So I
Yeah.
think it's just about having that, I do think it's about having that conviction that my voice is my voice, and this is the only voice I can write in.
It's amazing that through your publishing journey as well, that you've maintained your voice, because if
Yeah.
you end up in the hands of the wrong publisher or the wrong editor, it can be quite common where
Mm.
your voice gets edited out. So I guess it kind of brings me on quite nicely to where your publishing journey started with the big traditional publishing houses. You've had your 3 books out already, and you've got your 4th one due out it's next week, isn't it? Your 4th one's due out.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So your first 2 were big traditional publishing house. Your 3rd one
Yes.
was a small independent publisher, and then this 4th one is
Yes.
actually a project that you've managed on your own, yourself publishing it, which and
Yes.
to have that kind of catalogue of publishing experience is amazing. So I really just want to talk a little bit about your journey within that. So
Yeah.
can you tell us? You think back to your first book, once you'd finished your first manuscript, what was your first step into the publishing world?
Yeah, so the first thing is, and a lot of people have asked me over the years, in essence, boil it down to the same question: how do you write a book? Where do you begin? So the first thing is you've got to write it. That's the
Mm.
first thing, and there's no getting around that. You have to write the words. You have to the ideas and the thoughts and whatever this book is and whatever the message or the story that you have in your mind, you have to put it onto, traditionally paper, but obviously you have to get it out of your head and somewhere else. That's the first thing. So I did that, and I spent probably a year writing the different, and I did it a bit like a jigsaw puzzle. So I don't really believe that it's possible, certainly not for me, to come at a project like writing a book and just literally do it in order. I
Mm.
don't think that's how my mind has ever approached this. So I would do I'd do a piece of the jigsaw, this piece of the jigsaw, and that might end up being one chapter. I did another piece of the jigsaw as it came to me, and that would be another piece of the jigsaw. So I think it's a bit misleading to imagine that someone sits down and literally writes a book from the first page to the last page, and then it's just a fluid sort of continuation of this
I
stream
mean,
of,
you'd be a
of
blooming
thought.
genius, wouldn't you?
It just doesn't work like that.
Yeah.
It just doesn't. It's almost like, for me, especially with book number one and two, actually, and four particularly, because they were kind of my journey. Book three was slightly different because you're talking about other people's stories, so that it was a different setup altogether. But as the stories come to you, and as your experience and your memories and your journals, as they kind of come to you, and you feel like you get into that, you remember being in that place. That might be the chapter that you write, or that might be the story that you write, and you don't even know if it will be a chapter. You don't even know if it will go in there.
Yeah.
You know, so I think the first thing is to see it as being a jigsaw, and to kind of get even the micro stories before it turns into um a full entity, that you've got your 80,000 words or however many words you're going for. And I think people get too caught up on that as well.
Mm.
80,000 words of bullshit are not going to be great. It doesn't matter that you've got 80,000 words if they're nonsense and rubbish, and you've just sort of push the words out. It's like this obsession with word count is just
Yeah.
nonsense. Write a tiny part of the jigsaw that's good. Write a tiny part of your story that you really feel it, and you
That's it.
communicate that. Then
You can't be dictated by
put it
word count,
down
can
and
you?
move on to the. Oh God, no! It's just, it's never something that I've like. Of course, you've got to be mindful. Of course, you've got to realize that, and it was tricky for the first book because I had to condense from me being age 4 to me being at the time 36 into a book.
Yeah,
Um,
that's insane.
you've got to work out. I can't talk about my childhood. I can't talk about, the ages 4 to 17 for like 3/4 of the book, and then and then I started running, have a daughter, ran a marathon, and then I was, you've got to be able to balance that out. But I think, so like the jigsaw thing helped me, and then you begin to piece it together, and then you begin to see what follows on naturally, and that might be chronologically, it might be to do with topics. It depends on
Yeah.
how your mind, how you sort of intuitively want to set out that story, and it isn't always chronological. That's not always um, the
Yeah.
best option. So that's kind of where I started with the writing thing, and then from there, when I had the words, and they were very, very, the editing that I needed to do was massive, and I knew that, but at the same time, I'd done enough to show somebody the story that I wanted to write, and the
Yeah.
voice that I had, the writing voice that I had.
How many rounds of editing did you do? Because obviously you said that you recognised that it needed to be edited a lot, but you sent it quite
Well,
early on
yeah,
to be seen.
yeah. So I started, writing it in sort of April time, 2015, and then I had this, which is the kind of the Bible, the writing Bible for, and it's got it's got everything in that, from the agents that you might want to contact to information about self-publishing, and it's obviously this is an ancient volume now, but I started to work through the publishing houses literally from starting at A, and do my research, which were relevant to the genre that I was writing in. Many are not, so don't waste your time. So I kind of like highlighted those that I felt were relevant to the book that I wanted to put out there, and then I started to submit, and that was a really, really painful, long, arduous process, because it just is. And anyone who imagines that it's just simply attach an email, send it, is completely off the charts. That's just been entirely misconceived. So it took me months to trawl through that book, find the publishers that I wanted to target with the book, and it just so happened in the August of 2016, an editor in a large publishing house in London did pick up the submission, and she did see the story that I wanted to write and the voice that I had, the writing voice, and she did pick it up. So that was where that came
4
from.
months, basically.
Yeah, and that was really fast. I only got to B in the alphabet, so I only got to I didn't have to get to Z, so I started at A, and I only got to B. So they were Blink Publishing under the umbrella of Bonnier Publishing. So it tells you that, I felt, and I'd had a bit of positive feedback from other publishing houses, much smaller than that. But I felt lucky with this particular editor, had a brilliant working relationship with her. But then you asked me a question about the edits. That was in the August 2016. We worked on that manuscript for a year. We had 1 year to do the edit.
And that was from first draft, though. So she'd overseen your very first draft?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was lots of work to be done, but I think, again, so much of that, and we had loads of time because, if you get in a big cog, the publishing house wheel turns very slowly. So they'd sort of identified they wanted to publish the book in January 2018. I think we signed the publishing agreement in November, so it had been signed and sealed, I remember, in November 2016. So you've got a year and sort of, the 12-13 months, but in that process everything goes super slowly, because you might be backlogged between your editor working on, as she was. If you're in that big wheel, you kind of jump on, but you're not the only there are far bigger sort of fish to sort of swimming around in the same pond. So it's a really kind of long process, and it was very thorough and very eye-opening, because I had no idea that there'd be a structural edit, that there'd be the full story edit, there'd be chapter edits, then there'd be a legal edit, then there'd be line by line, then there'd be a proof edit. It was just an insane sort of the level of scrutiny was crazy. But throughout that, I did fall lucky because my writing voice remained
so good.
It wasn't compromised. Yeah.
Did you find were you kind of involved within the edits the whole way through? How did it kind of work? Did she call you in and go through stuff, or did she just do stuff on her own and then kind of show you? Or
no, she'd never do she'd never do any of that. It was all, everything was bounced back to me. So everything was we'd have calls and go through things. I'd go down to London, we'd sit down and go through things marked up, but all of the edits came from me. There was no point at which any word or any paragraph was tweaked or rewritten or any of that was not done by me.
That's really good.
So that was never taken out of my hands. Yeah, and I don't know how I would have felt if there was even any suggestion that would be appropriate, because that would no longer be my book in that case.
Yeah, because in non-fiction it is you and it is your voice, whereas in fiction there is room for an editor within fiction books to kind of take that work and fiddle about with it and move words around and move paragraphs around and stuff. But it's, in essence, it's basically like a journal, your personal journal. So who is an editor to change anything? But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a given that you want and wants to help you maintain that voice.
Yeah, I think really it's down to the working relationship, and it's down to the trust that you have. And me and Beth did have, right from the start, we had a really close connection, and she understood fully the book that I wanted to write, and she never kind of put me in a position where that felt, it was fortuitous that she was the person that kind of picked this book up, but also it was just about the trust and the and what that relationship felt like. It never felt like it was somebody else trying to manipulate my words, and like I say, I'm not too sure that I would have been okay with that had that been the case, but thankfully it wasn't.
What was the kind of process then after the book had been completely edited? You were both happy with it. What happened next?
It was basically, again, everything was like long, everything's drawn out. So there's just a long gaps in between. So there were times when, you might have 2 months to do the next round of edits. Everything was just elongated in time. So when we got to the finished manuscript, then it just moved on to the cover designers and the other stuff that needed to happen.
Yep.
Because there's a lot more involved. I was an unpublished author. I had no previous book. I had no there's no kind of fame, or nobody knew who the hell I was. So we had to put together kind of a plan to reach out, get the book out for it to get endorsements, so that people within the relevant community could kind of read it. And that needed to happen, because it's like, who is this person and what is this book? So that was another stage that we needed to go through. And then from there, it was just waiting for publication, and then it was just like a whole whirlwind of PR and media, which was just mind bending. And it was a very, very busy time, but also I think perhaps I was a little bit naive in terms of I thought that writing the book would be like the thing that I needed to do, and I had no idea that I'd need to become like confident at talking on live radio or going on television or any of that stuff. I had no idea that I'd need to do photo shoots in London in warehouse for women's magazines. I had no idea that was going to be a part of this journey, but it was. So I kind of just had to just do that.
Had they kind of not given you any kind of...
Yeah, we'd had... I was realistic in the sense that this particular publishing house, they predominantly took on the autobiographies of famous people. So they were very used to people who were familiar with PR. They were familiar with that kind of... So, the Jensen Buttons and the Gary Barlows and all of that stuff. They had people whose books they were publishing, who knew what that was. So I think there was a little bit of a presumption on their part that I would just be okay with that, which I was okay with it. But at the same time, it was a bit of a shock. I'm not going to lie. It was a bit of a shock. And they tried as far as they could, perhaps, to kind of prepare me for that and hold my hand, but nothing can really prepare you for that. Nothing can really prepare you for having to talk about, a bout of serious mental illness live on the radio, and having an interviewer ask you how you think sharing your mental health journey is going to impact your very young daughter. You've got no idea what that feels like until you're actually asked that question in an interview, and and like I say, that's why you've got to be so confident and sure about your own story, because that's all you can ever go back to. Like, I guess going through that experience taught me that your authentic voice is the only voice that you can ever have.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting hearing the kind of different side to PR and to media experience and stuff, because you kind of visualize it as a very glitzy, glamorous world of book launches and book signings and appearances and stuff. But then you kind of, especially within this genre, you don't then appreciate the other side to it, where you are literally expressing that vulnerability of your struggles and your personal journey live, in some cases, to like the world.
Oh yeah, I was interviewed by sort of a Canadian. There's a Canadian radio station. It was literally American running podcast. It was literally just this kind of enormous exposure. And I think the other part of this is, and I mentioned it right at the start of the interview, it's this presumption that somehow you're fixed now, and somehow you are uber confident and you don't have any further struggles, and you found the answer, and that's great, and life's everything's okay then. And at that time there was this kind of undercurrent of, and now she's she's overcome all that, and now and it's like there is a reality check in terms of, and I've had to learn this lesson for myself, that it is not an end destination, and you've always got to be mindful of those things that keep you safe. I don't know if it's a bit of an Oprahism, but to keep you grounded, and to not let any of this stuff kind of pull you from the things that have kept you safe. And one example of that, and it's an obvious example, is running was a place that had kept me safe. Well, when I started to, share my story and the journey I'd been on, it no longer felt safe. I felt very exposed, and I couldn't rely on that anymore to give me the same, to give me the same support as it had done. And I had situations where one woman came running up to me at a 10k race, and I was like really legging it, breathing out my backside, and she literally said, something like, "Oh, Rachel, if I manage to get to beat you and get under 41 minutes on this 10k, I'm going to buy your book." And it's like, I don't really want that kind of, I just didn't want that kind of motivation. It felt like running was no longer just in myself. Running felt to be exposed, and I think I lost that. Yeah, it felt like that, and I think really that was kind of a price that I paid, and I feel like I'm much further on the journey now, but I did feel very exposed. And I felt as though there was a pressure to kind of maintain this level of recovery, or to not struggle, or to well, I'm there now, and then remain there. Well, that's just not life. Things don't happen in that kind of linear way. So that's just not the truth.
Your journey did continue with writing and publishing as well. You had another book with the traditional publishing house, but then you decided to, for your third book, you decided to change route and go down with the independent publisher. Can you talk a little bit about the differences in your experience with a small independent publisher?
Yeah, I think for the third book, it was really important that for me, because it was still about running, but it was about other people's stories and experiences with running. I'd managed to get the support of the running brand Saucony, who were very into the kind of the positive mental well-being messages, and they were kind of backing me on this project right from the start. Before any publishers were involved, they gave me some resources and a platform really to kind of believe that I could write this book, and it was something that people wanted to read. So with that in mind, I felt it was important to go to a publisher who knew the running community and who were actively publishing books in that space, rather than a celebrity focused Jensen Buttons, and between Jensen Button and Gary Barlow,
It's a bit different.
and Lily Allen. Yeah, so instead of this kind of, I'm just this little newcomer in this big world of celebrity biographies, which is exactly what it was, that didn't feel to be about running and for people who, you know, that was a completely different, it was for a different readership group. And I think I wanted to go to a publisher who perhaps was smaller for the reasons that I've talked about. You know, I didn't want the, you know, Strictly Come Dancing expose. Perhaps that was a little bit of it as well. But the most of it was about me wanting to approach a publisher who were really connected with the running and the outdoor and the fitness community. And that's what I got with Vertebrate, who published the third book. And I knew this would be the only book they would publish for me, because I had no intention of writing any more books relating to that genre.
Did you, was there kind of a difference in maybe the market that they reached with their kind of PR efforts and everything?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I mean, I think it was just much more runner based, and I think with the involvement of Saucony, that was the case too. But it was lower key. It was, you know, they were Yorkshire based publishing house. They turn over quite a lot of books, so they have, it's not such a big, there isn't such a big push on the titles, so we didn't have the year wait. Everything was faster paced. Again, the you know, everybody there, it was very much my voice in the stories that were written. So there was nothing different in the sense of the editor that I worked with there, and with it being other people's stories too. The most important thing was that they were happy with how they'd been communicated. It wasn't about me anymore. So the important thing was that every person whose stories, who had told me their stories, were fully briefed on what this was. They had the chance to read it beforehand, make any changes, comment as they wished. So that was a really important part of the project. So it was just very different. It's very different when you are responsible for telling another person's story, and there is a responsibility that comes with that. It's one thing telling your own, but it's another thing when you're trying to communicate somebody else's. And some of the stories were really, really powerful, and it was a really emotional experience. Not only hearing those stories, but having to actually put those down into words and communicate, as you know, as those people had sort of shared their experience with me. So that was a very different experience completely.
Really love that idea though. I really, really love the idea of it's effectively people that have been through, again, the same thing, and they've used running as like an outlet, and then you put in their experiences into books. It just makes the whole thing feel very community orientated, and even more highlights the fact that it's not just one writer that they can resonate with. It's a whole like community of people who are going through these struggles that they can then resonate with. But then your fourth book is very different completely.
Yeah, we're back to me again now, which is so we've had some time out. We've had some time out from focusing on my stories, but this one, that one, this one has been on my mind for a long, long time. And I remember Tilly being a baby and me knowing that I wanted to write her a book, nothing to do with running, because that wasn't really where my head was at this time. And I just remember sitting at a desk when she was very young. She was in a cot, and knowing there were stories that I wanted to share with her, and it was kind of put on a back burner. I forgot about it. You get on with your life. I had a business to run at the time, and then in 2020 a few things happened in quick succession that kind of brought it back into my awareness and back onto my kind of radar, and I started to write the stories just in the jigsaw manner that I've described. I started to write the stories, and and I knew that ultimately I'd pull those together and write them in a book. So I've been on this journey now for such a long time that I feel emboldened, really, that I have opened myself up, my experiences, and I believe that I can communicate those in a way that is safe to me, and I am brave enough now to kind of know that you will be judged whatever you say and whatever you do, and
Yeah.
I'm kind of past the point of worrying too much, about any negative. There's always going to be that side of things, and again, that's a reality for doing something like this. But the other people who really matter in my life, I value their opinions, and I wanted to write this predominantly for Tilly, and if other people want to read it and enjoy it, that's great. It's a very personal book, they're very personal stories, and I wanted to be the person that dealt with every aspect of it, and it's all me.
And that's why you chose the self-publishing route for this one.
Yeah, I think so. I'm a little bit done with the gatekeeper. I've been writing books for quite a long time now within the non-fiction sort of health and well-being genre, and it's possible to want to move ahead with a project and know what you want to say and know what it is that you want to write and know how you want to communicate it, but you're met with these various barriers. And to be honest, I kind of thought, you know what, I'm brave enough to go ahead anyway and do this, and I don't need perhaps or want to have those gatekeepers telling me that I think we should wait until January 2025, or I think we need to do a year's worth of edits. I'm confident enough in the people that I've kind of worked with as part of this project, and it has been a long project. I've been working on this on and off for the last 3 years, albeit I've written another book in the meantime, but nobody would benefit from me just being held back because of the kind of the churnings of a publishing house.
You wouldn't have, I guess, been in the position that you are now to self-publish had you not been through the kind of cogs that you've been through before with the traditional publishing houses, and you must have gained so much experience and knowledge about the process that I guess that adds to your confidence in being able to do it on your own now.
Oh yeah, completely. I mean, when you've been through the whole process from the conception of an idea to writing the book to the various stages of editing to getting a final product together to the design to the PR and marketing to all of that stuff, it's a huge process. When you've been through that 3 times, you do get to figure out which bits work for you, which bits you think not, it's maybe would I do things a bit differently, maybe. So you do build confidence, of course you do, and you build knowledge. And had I not benefited from that experience, yeah, of course it would feel very, very different. And I'm not sure. Yeah, and I'm not sure whether I would have chosen to self-publish if it had been my first book. But it feels authentic, and it feels like the right thing for me to do, and it feels like I can choose now. I can choose what PR and marketing I do or don't do. It's entirely up to me what the what happens with this book. And I just don't feel the need to. I'm not striving anymore to kind of push things. I don't feel the need to push as hard as I did. I'm kind of, if people want to read it and enjoy it, that's great. And if they don't, that's great too. I'm kind of much more relaxed about that whole thing. And I don't want to get into a stage where it becomes a stress or an obsession over how many books I've sold. I don't really care, to be honest. And that might sound a little bit arrogant, or I don't know, but my motivation is not to go and ram this book out there into the world. It's to write a book that I'm really happy with and to let it fly. And me pushing something is not going to do that. And a big publishing house machine doing that is going to make me probably enjoy the experience less than I would do if it was up to me. So I've just chosen not to do that.
Does that mean that you haven't done any PR and marketing at all? Are you just kind of just going to let it authentically do what it does? Or because I know this question is kind of from the whole self-publishing author industry. The big question is
Yeah.
always, how can I market my book? How can I get my book read by the world? So I don't know if you've already answered that question in terms of you're not that bothered, but have you done anything towards PR and marketing for this one?
It's not that I'm not that bothered, but I think what I have done is, because over the last 8 years, ever since I started writing the first book in 2015, and ever since that first experience, which, you know, really kind of pushed me, my writing out there, I have established myself as, I've written 3 nonfiction books now. That's a thing that you know, people who've read my books know, they know my voice, they know the kind of, they know the style of my writing, and I know that there are a small but kind of loyal group of readers who enjoy what I write, and I've done that, and I've created that over the last 6 years, it would be. So I've kind of got a little bit of a, it's only a small platform, but it's a platform that many people would not have. So I think that gives me an advantage over somebody like myself back in 2015 who has got no prior, you know, nobody knows that I've written a book. You know, it's the first thing I've ever done. So it's a very different, I'm in a very different place to that person.
Yeah.
And I'm in a very different place. You know, there are people who are already looking forward to reading the book because they've enjoyed my others.
Yeah. You've got a follow.
So I guess I'm kind of writing to my, I'm kind of writing for my own audience as well, which, you know, let me be clear, it's very small. It's like my mum and 2 other people, but like who needs to know, who needs to worry too much about that? But you know, I have written 3 books that other people have read, and some people enjoy reading my stuff, and I think, you know, for those people, they'll be able to get their hands on the new book, and hopefully they'll enjoy reading it, and they won't need me to go on Look North and have an anxiety attack trying to convince people to spend the money buying my book. It's just something that I don't feel the need to do, and I don't particularly want to do that. And I'm going to go up to one of my favourite bookshops up in Carlisle. I was at the Borderlines book festival. I did a talk up there last year, and I'm going to go up there in January. And I wanted to do that a few months after this has been published, because it gives people the opportunity, if they do want to come up, to read the book, and if there's anything that people want to ask me within it, I feel like that's more authentic and more purposeful than me just going up to talk about something that nobody's read.
That's really nice.
That I'm looking forward
It's
to.
much more authentic and much more personal, and like you said, you've been able to choose that experience, and it's something that you
Yeah,
want to do for you, and you can personalize it
yeah,
and run it however you want to do it. And it would mean
yeah,
probably a lot more to the people that show up as well, because it's come
yeah.
from that place. I talk a lot about book goals, and I think having your book goals, the goals of your book, is really important to have in your mind before you go ahead and publish, because it's just a completely different experience. So whereas your book goals for the first book might have been one way, now your goals are that you're writing to your very small audience, and those are the people that you care about receiving it. So it's developed and changed and evolved over the 8 years that you've been writing for. I
Yeah.
just wanted to ask a final question before we wrap up. Whether you have any advice for that you can give to people who have finished their manuscripts within this genre and they want to get them published. What would your advice be for those people?
I guess the first thing that I'd say is seek out some opinions, some opinions from other people who are prepared to read your work, and opinions from people who, you know, if you're fortunate enough to have somebody who, you know, is involved in some way, whether that be a copywriter or whether it be a friend who's in, you know, who loves that particular genre and who reads a lot in that. I think you need to get some opinions and you need to get some honest opinions. And I'm not talking about asking your mum to read it and then your mum tells you, it's brilliant, Rach. You know, that's not what you need. You need some really kind of honest feedback from people who you trust, as to the bits that work, the areas that they particularly enjoy, the things that they don't really understand, or that the thing you're trying to say isn't really coming across. So you need feedback, and you need to get some good quality feedback from people that you trust. And then I think from there, it's about, as you say, working out what are your goals for this. And in that, I think one thing that I never considered was, what are my goals that are going to keep me safe? You know, if I'm going to be going for, I really want to push my book out and get a major publishing house. That was never my goal. My goal was to get a publishing house to publish my book. It wasn't to get this massive exposure, but that happened. But in that, it's kind of take care of yourself on that journey, because it can easily kind of sweep you up or eat you up in a way. And possibly just have a look, you know, we're in a different time now, and have a look into the things that you can do. You know, there are many facilities out there, you know, to help you get your story out into the world. And it doesn't have to be this kind of old-fashioned, it just doesn't have to be that. And I really think now, especially with the experience of writing my fourth book and knowing what that was like, it's felt so much more freeing and liberating to know that I could do that all along. I could have it would have been a very different experience, but I could have done that for all my books. I wouldn't have had the reach that I did have, but it's possible to do that. Just know that there are many options, and it doesn't have to be this kind of old-fashioned, you know, it needs to be a publishing house. And honestly, look at other options and be open-minded, because it's just not linear. And the way that you think, you imagine that you might have to do this is not the only way.
Yeah, definitely. Book goals are so big. I think that's one of the takeaways from this, is that there's so many different options of publishing, and as long as you've cemented your book's goals in your mind, then you will work out which option for publishing is the best for yours.
Yeah.
I'm gonna wrap it up there, but I want to thank you for coming on the show. And your new book, Dear Tilly, is out on 20th of October.
Yes, it is. It's published on the 20th of October. It's coming out in paperback and ebook. And if anyone wants to read it, that's great. And yeah, and I love it. So there you go. That's that.
I'm gonna put I'll put some links underneath. If you're watching this on YouTube, I'll put links underneath to Rachel's Amazon page, so you can see all her published books on the Amazon page. Go and grab your copy of Dear Tilly next week. If what you've heard from Rachel today has inspired you to write your own book within this genre, but maybe you don't know where to start, drop us an email on info@ravencrestbooks.com, and maybe we can help you. Maybe you're going to be in a position one day like Rachel where you're on book number 4. But thank you very, very much. Good luck with your launch, and thanks for coming on, Rachel.
My pleasure. I love to talk to you. Thanks, Becky.